Now, the way the news works, for those of you who have never spent time in this industry, if you don't know the business model of the news, you could be caught blindsided by the importance of social media to the news in general. Here's how it works. If you're a news organization, you say, hey, here's some news. You report on the news, and then you watch social media. Because social media is going to tell you how much people care. They're going to tell you what people think about it. They're going to tell you what people click on. They're going to tell you what headlines get the most traffic. That feedback loop goes back to the news. Right? So CNN, or anybody, Fox News, they do a story because they found some information that's new and relevant. Then they monitor social media to decide if they do more of it. So there's no such thing as just watching the news anymore. If you're watching the news and you have no social media accounts, you're still watching social media because the news is responding to social media and doing more of what it says they need and less of what it says they don't need. All right, let's talk about there was a story that said there were 3 different prediction models that say that President Trump will win easily in 2020. So 3 different models, and I think they look at things such as the economy is doing well and inflation is low. So they're looking at these external markers that have always been very accurate in determining who's going to get elected. But we didn't see too many prediction models work in 2016. Some did, but mostly the prediction models did not work in 2016. What would make them work in 2020? Why would we trust any prediction models after living through 2016? Well, I would say we shouldn't, because there's something about this president that's not like any other president, and that probably every rule that used to exist, it just doesn't count anymore. So I'm going to give you 2 different prediction models. Number 1, I've already mentioned. This prediction model says that social media learned its lesson in 2016. They learned how powerful they are. They've had 4 years to improve their effectiveness, and that the people running these social media companies, primarily the people who are closest to the algorithm. This does not mean the CEOs. So when I talk about social media manipulating results in the election, I'm not talking about the top person in the company giving an order to the underlings to do this. I think that's unlikely to be true because the people who are at the top have way too much to lose, because they have good lives. They don't want to throw it away committing something so stupid. They would be, of course, ratted out. There's no way that a CEO of a social media company could give an order to put their finger on the scales and hope that that wouldn't get out someday. Too many people would know about the order. It would be effectively handing over your entire life to somebody else. Let me put this in a word picture. You're Mark Zuckerberg, and let's say, I don't believe this is the case. So I do not believe that Mark Zuckerberg thinks the way I'm going to explain. But imagine if he did. If he thought, hey, I want to influence this election however I want to influence it, imagine him calling somebody into his office, an underling, and saying, hey, I want to put my finger on the scale of this election. So why don't you go do it? Do what you need to do to the algorithm to make this happen. At that moment, the underling owns Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg would be giving away all of his power, because the person who knows that he ordered them to change the election could just go to the media. That person would own Mark Zuckerberg, not just that day and not just during that election year, but forever. Mark Zuckerberg's job would depend on the loyalty and keeping happy the one person he ordered to go change the algorithm. So in my opinion, the Jack Dorseys, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Sundar who, am I pronouncing his name wrong? I can never pronounce Google's CEO. I don't believe any of them are giving an order to an underling to say, go do this. I think that's the least likely thing that's happening. The most likely thing is that lots of people are involved in lots of individual decisions that somehow feed into this large algorithm monster. It's lots of people with lots of different theories on how to change the algorithm for a lot of good reasons. Things that would help the consumer, etc. There is probably a handful of people, at least, in each of these companies that know that if they choose this choice, they get a certain set of outcomes, and if they choose this other choice for the variables or the code in the algorithm, they'll get a slightly different choice, different outcome. I believe that those people could both consciously and or unconsciously influence the election fairly simply, just by changing a variable and knowing how that would ripple through the system. So we've got one theory, one prediction model says that social media, of course, has the ability to influence the election. And I'll say more about that in a minute. They have the ability, they've had years to perfect it, and they have the motivation. So if nothing changes, social media will decide who is the president. That's the first model. So I provocatively made that assessment, which I won't call a prediction because it's a straight line prediction, and those are absurd. A straight line prediction says, suppose nothing changed between now and 2020. This is what it would look like. And what it would look like is that Trump would not win, because the social media companies have the will, the power, the ability to influence things, and they could cause that not to happen. But what are the odds that nothing changes between now and 2020 that would change the balance of the votes? Very low. The odds are very high that something would change. So here's the other prediction model. It's called the Adams Law of Slow-Moving Disasters. It's the most reliable law you will ever see in terms of predicting. It has predicted the outcome of every disaster we've ever encountered in terms of disasters that we saw coming for a long time. So the way the Adams Law of Slow-Moving Disasters works is if everybody can see a problem coming, and we've got lots of time to get a solution, and we know exactly what the problem is, even if we don't know how to solve it on day one, we're really good at figuring out how to deal with it over the long run. So because we're very alerted to the fact that the social media companies can put their thumb on the scale, we also have 2 years to do something about it. So what are the odds that either the voters or some individual or some inventor or somebody in the social media companies themselves, it could actually be one of the CEOs of the social media companies, could do something different than what we expect? What if the government decides to do some small form of regulation that just gets to this question, and that's all? Suppose the government, and I'm not proposing this, I'm just allowing you to imagine things. Suppose the government said, well, we don't have enough time to put together a comprehensive regulatory framework, but we're going to, because the election is so important, and we might have Russian interference, we might have a variety of different interferences, I'm going to appoint a special judge for the algorithms. Now, is that legal? I don't know. But imagine that we could do something like that some way. We could probably figure out how to make it legal if it's not legal. So it'd be a special judge, sort of like a special prosecutor type person, who is the only person who's allowed, with that person's small staff, they're the only ones who are allowed to see the algorithms of all the major players, so that they would have complete freedom to go in and look at any kind of confidential documentation. Now, that would be a very special type of oversight that would be limited to the election. So it wouldn't be the big oversight where they're making sure every person is treated the same and every business has has visibility and there's no censorship and stuff like that. I'm not talking about that stuff. That stuff might also have to happen. But you probably need some judge and a small group of people who just have access and full visibility to the algorithms and what it all means. Now, it could be that it's too complicated. It might be that it's just so complicated that you can't even get anybody who could understand it. I think that's possible. But the larger idea is this. If nothing changes, the social media companies will determine the election. And I'm going to say a little more of that. But we have a few years to come up with a solution that nobody's thought of. I haven't thought of, you haven't thought of. There's probably a solution. And it may have nothing to do with the algorithms. It could be some entirely different mechanism. So a lot of creativity will go into it. Everybody sees this as a problem. I think it will be solved. Now, somebody said to me, actually several people said to me on social media, they said to me, Scott, you are overstating the effect of social media because you're on it and you think everybody's on it, because when you're in that world, it just seems like everybody's on Twitter and everybody's talking about the news. But the reality is most people don't care about social media, at least in terms of following the news. Most people probably don't even follow the news. Most people are sort of dialed into their own world, and social media will not have that much impact. To which I say, wrong as you could be. I'm seeing people agreeing with that statement in the comments, agreeing that social media can't influence us that much. Here's why you're wrong. Certainly the news collectively can influence people. I think you'd all agree with that. But when I say influence people, we're only talking about that thin sliver of people who could be influenced. 98% of the country can't be influenced. 98% of the country already know who they're going to vote for. It's either going to be whoever the Democrat is or Trump. Maybe 2%, maybe 5% could be moved in any direction. So they're the only ones that matter. That's the first thing to know. And beyond that, it's not even the small percentage of people who could change their opinion that matter. They have to be in the right states. Because if they're not in the right states, moving 1 or 2% in either direction doesn't make any difference. It's still going to be the same result. Just the margin will be a little different, but the same outcome. So there's a very, very small group of people who matter. People who can be persuaded, and they're in the right half dozen states. That's it. We might be talking about 200,000 people that matter. Period. That's it. 200,000 people. They're the only ones that have to be influenced. Now, the way the news works, for those of you who have never spent time in this industry, if you don't know the business model of the news, you could be caught blindsided by the importance of social media to the news in general. Here's how it works. If you're a news organization, you say, hey, here's some news. You report on the news, and then you watch social media. Because social media is going to tell you how much people care. They're going to tell you what people think about it. They're going to tell you what people click on. They're going to tell you what headlines get the most traffic. That feedback loop goes back to the news. Right? So CNN, or anybody, Fox News, they do a story because they found some information that's new and relevant. Then they monitor social media to decide if they do more of it. So there's no such thing as just watching the news anymore. If you're watching the news and you have no social media accounts, you're still watching social media because the news is responding to social media and doing more of what it says they need and less of what it says they don't need. Now, when I say social media, I mean the internet in general, how much people are clicking on their news sites, how much traffic Twitter is driving to their news sites, Facebook, etc. So there's no such thing as somebody who's not watching social media. Because if you watch any kind of news, you're watching social media. And those few people I'm talking about who might have some chance of moving one way or the other, far more likely to be watching the news. Because the people who are, let's say, data-driven are looking for data. So they're the ones who actually care what's happening because it might influence their decision. If you've already decided, and it doesn't matter what the news is, you don't need to watch. So social media will, in fact, change the news, and the news plus social media are the only things we have to go on. It's the only thing that moves people's vote is social media plus the news. So everybody's watching social media, even if they don't have a social media account.